Welcome to Artistic Adventures. We're going to make this cute dress for the island Bru doll from a pattern that I made, and I'm going to be selling the pattern on Etsy. Let's go. So we're going to start with this pattern that I made. I said in our last video that the way I do this is I'll take one of the Bru dolls and basically just use a paper towel and sketch out and cut out, the pattern thing sizes to fit the doll based on my past experience, of sewing and knowing what, patterns look like for adults, peoples. I can pretty much figure out, how to make a pattern for the doll. Once I get the paper towel pattern cut out and hold it up and make sure I've got, enough room for seams and all that stuff, then I will trace it onto regular paper, so I can make a permanent copy. So this, I made the individual pieces, pasted it to this page, scanned it, and then in my photo editing software, I added the text, the title and the text of each thing, and was able to make this basically this pattern page. So what I'm going to do is make a file in a PDF form of the pattern so you can use it, cut it out, and reprint it, and then also with some pictorial instructions on how to make the dress. So as I'm doing this video, I'm going to also be making some photos, and then I will make the PDF available for sale on my Etsy site, so anybody can purchase it for a nominal fee. They'll get the instructions along with the pattern. They could also look at this video for more instructions. So the first thing you want to do is get your little pair of scissors and cut out your pattern, just like you would for anything else. So I'm not going to make you watch me cut this whole thing out. I'm going to take a little break, cut everything out, and then we'll come back and show you how we're going to cut it out of the material. So stay tuned. Okay, I've cut out all the pieces, and I just want to let you know how we're going to do this. This particular part, the bodice, I cut one for outside and one for the lining. You can do that in the same color, or you can do it in a different color. Let's say if you wanted to have the lining be a different color for some reason. I mean, sometimes it can look cute, if you have the lining a different color. Or let's say this was a sheer material and you wanted the backing to be solid and show through, it might be a different color. So just for our purposes, we're going to make it out of the same material. The skirt, you're going to cut 3 and sew together because we want the waist to be smaller than the base. And we're still going to have to gather it, but if you make a skirt, let's say like this, when you gather it for these small dolls, it just looks like a cup. It looks like that. It doesn't flare out, even though you gather it. So for this dress, we want it to flare out a little bit, not so much that it sticks straight out, because these dolls also don't have a lot of length to their dresses, and if you make it so that this is too big, then it's going to just stick straight out from the body like that instead of hanging down. So we'll cut 3 of those. We're going to cut 2 of the sleeves. Now this I listed on this page as an optional bib insert. So when I say that, it's that, say a dress like this could have a little white bib, and you could put, like a button on it or something like that, just for extra decoration. and I will do that out of a contrasting color. Now, I want to tell you another way you could do this if you wanted to have pleats in it. You know, typically if you did this for human size, you would cut out this material. The sew lines would be marked on it, and you would actually sew it. You would actually put the pleats in after you cut out the material. So this would be much bigger, it would be wider, and it would have markings on the pattern where to sew the pleats. But you can't do that. Well, I'm not going to say you can't. You might be able to, but you're not going to want to. So what you can do is make you a long column of material, pleats, and then put your pattern on it and cut it out, and your pleats are already in it. So that way you have some nice looking pleats, but you don't, you know, want to kill yourself while you are trying to sew together on this little tiny piece of material. So this is a piece I had made for doing Blythe clothes, and it's a little bit too big for this purpose, so I'm just going to do a plain one. But I wanted to show you that technique because sometimes when you're sewing doll clothes you have to think about things a little differently, just because it's harder to sew certain things in a certain way for these small items. So I'm just going to put that away. And then this is just some white material. It's got a little bit of a pattern like white on white, but it'll be fine for our purposes. And we're also going to put some lace around this, so it's going to look really cute. So I'm just going to pin this together to hold it. I'm going to have to move the pin around. And I just found that the best scissors for doll clothes are hair cutting scissors. They're sharp, they kind of stay sharp, and they're good for cutting around small places. So I know that probably seems somewhat sacrilegious, because how many times did you get in trouble like for using your mom's sewing scissors for something like cutting paper because it dulled them? But I've tried so many different kinds of fabric scissors for doll clothes, and mostly they're just too big, and they don't tend to stay sharp. But these hair cutting scissors, I think it's because they have a little tiny serrated edge. They're very nice and sharp. Now I'm going to push that pin down below the neckline so I can cut this out. And once again, with these small dolls, one of your best friends is fray check. What is fray check? If you have not been on my channel before, let me just show you. Oh, I always turn things upside down because I think I'm doing it upside down. Okay, so this is fray check, and it's liquid that you put on the edges of material to keep it from fraying, oddly enough. So for doll clothes, it's really important because, say on an adult human, if you sewed a seam here, you would probably sew it with a 3/8 inch or 5/8 inch, I think it is, distance between where you sew and the edge of the material. Well, that's a lot that has to fray before it gets to the seam and makes the seam come apart. But with dolls, you're sewing 1/4 of an inch from the edge, basically. That's not a lot of area. And then if you have to trim it, and we're going to have to trim some things, so I'll show you why and how. But if you have to put like the V's in it, if you're going to sew on a curve, you know, you're almost going to the seam. You've got to have something that's going to hold that material. Some material doesn't fray. And you don't necessarily have to do that with, you know, every single material, but for these doll clothes, and like I'm using cotton, you know, I'm definitely going to want to use it. So we'll talk about using the fray check in a minute. But first, we're going to cut out our dress material. And yes, I'm actually going to use this material I've had in the background for the last 2 videos. For just this reason. So I'm going to just open this up and get to the end of it. This is the end of it right here. Okay. And we're going to cut 2 of everything except this. So I'm going to wait to cut that. We'll just go ahead and cut out the ones that we need 2 of. And we'll pin this down. And pin this down. Now this is just plain cotton material. Nothing special about it. There are some materials that will fray more than others. This isn't super bad, but if you mess with it a lot, and if it's something where you have to turn, like with sleeves and things like that, where you have to sew it and then turn it, the more you manipulate the fabric after you've sewed it, the more chances that you have to make it fray. So I'm going to just speed up the camera while I'm cutting this out, and then it'll be done really fast. Okay, now we're going to add an extra layer, and it doesn't really matter because it's symmetrical, so it doesn't matter that, you know, you have one side or the other. So what I'm going to do is just cut out a portion of fabric that's big enough for this. Okay, and then we'll just pin it. We'll just put it on top of the double layer, and then we'll have 3 layers. And we'll pin the skirt to all 3 layers here. And then speed up the camera again to cut it out so you don't have to wait. Okay, so we have all of our pieces cut out, including our little optional bib. So now I'm going to walk you through putting the fray check on. Alright, we have our cut pieces. Put down a piece of aluminum foil. I apologize for the glare from the lights. I do have it on the dull side, so not too bad, but just kind of unavoidable. So we're going to remove the patterns, put those aside. Now you can reuse this pattern, you know, just like any pattern, until it just gets unusable, but you're going to have a PDF of the you know, the whole page, so you can reprint it. Or if you want to, the first time you print it, you might want to make a couple copies. Save yourself having to go back into your computer from the pattern. Alright, so the thing about fray check is, this may be my 100th bottle using it. I have never been able to get it to the point that it will come out in a slow, steady, small stream. No matter how small I cut it, because you just have to, you know, cut the tip off, and it does get clogged up. So when you're working with small areas like this product is going to bleed into the fabric, even if you put it right on the edge. So especially for solid material, or material that the product will show where it dries, you want to avoid that, because you don't have a lot of real estate here. You're going to be sewing 1/4 edge from the side. So if it bleeds in more than that, it's going to show on your fabric. So what I've decided is the best thing to do is to use a paintbrush. So you don't have to rely on the consistency of how you squirt it on there. Maybe takes a little bit more time, but I've just found that it's worth it. So I go through a lot of paint brushes with my Doll Biz, so I've always got one that's kind of old and getting ready to die, and I'll use that one because I tend to end up having to throw it away because it's just hard to get this stuff out. It's really nuclear proof. So this is a way you can put the fray check right on the edge, and you're only using, you know, a little bit, so it's not going to bleed into the fabric very much. Now I'm doing all 3 layers at one time. I'm hoping this is going to work. I've always done the 2 layers, and it does soak through to the other layer beneath. I'm not sure if that's going to work with this. If not, I'll just flip it over after it dries and do the other side. But it does tend to go through on 2 sides pretty well, so that's a good thing. So what you're going to have here is a nice edge that's not going to ravel, and it's going to be just a little bit stiffer than it was, you know, without the fray check. But that's okay. That's okay. Sometimes that's actually good. But you just don't want to have it be really thick or penetrate in, because then you end up having it show, and then you have stiffness where you didn't want it to have stiffness. So we're going to do the same thing to all of these pieces. It's especially important for this piece because this is not going to be hemmed. This is, we're going to sew some lace to this around the edge. So you need to have a good solid edge that's not going to ravel and look unsightly on the front of your dress. So that part is very, very important. Also, if you use an old brush like I'm doing, make sure you've cleaned it really well, because if you haven't gotten all the paint out and then you start doing this, you're going to put the color on the fabric. It wouldn't matter much for this red, but if you're doing white or a lighter color that it's going to show up, then you have ruined your fabric pretty much, probably. Alright, I'm just going to speed up the camera here again and finish this up so we don't waste you guys' time watching me do this slowly. Alright, so we finished adding the fray check, and as you saw, I had to flip this over because the bottom layer really didn't get the application soaked through. One other thing I want to remind you of, or tip you off on, is let's say you're doing this, and let's say this is a solid color, like a light blue or any kind of solid color really. And you decide to flip this over, whatever. Be sure that any product that's left on here, when you flip it, you don't put it down in an area that will show, because once you do that, it's really difficult to get this out. I don't know what it's made out of, but it's difficult to get out. Let me just say that. Maybe acetone would take it out, but You know what? I tried to use acetone on a doll's dress the other day, and it ate a hole in it. A dress I've spent hours and hours working on. So, we're going to let this dry for a little bit, and then we'll come back, and I'll show you how we're going to complete it. Alright, we have our optional bib, and this looks a little uneven, so I'm going to just trim this a little bit. Sometimes you don't get them cut out exactly the way you want. Now, this is made to fit. I got this black thing here so you can actually see the white bib. This is going to fit here, and we're going to sew it in between the lining and the outside. So we have to complete this piece first, so we can do that. So we're going to need some thread, our bib, and some lace. So I have several different types of really tiny lace here, and I think I'm going to go with this. I don't know, this other lace looks a little too wide. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with this. And as I put this, sew this on, I'm going to sort of gather it. And I do that by, when I put the needle into the thread, I'm going to make the needle go further down into the lace than I'm going into the fabric, and that will draw the lace up a little bit. You could do this by running a gathering thread through here too, which, you know, it's not a bad way to do it. The problem I have with that is that it tends to bunch up and it's harder to sew down, so I just try to do it as I sew it. Okay, so we'll start up here, and this is going to be sewed into the seam of the neckline, so I'm not worried that it's not exactly a finished edge right up at the top. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit on this so you can see. I did double the thread over the lace over, but it's probably not going to show. It's coming undone anyway. That's the story of my life. Always an adventure. And I'm just going in and out because the thread really doesn't show. Alright, so I'm ready to start gathering. So what I do is I just move the lace up a little bit, and then with my thumb as I put the seam in. And I come back out and do that again. I'm just going to do that all the way around until I have completely sewn lace all the way around the edge. So I won't bore you with that. I will. Alright, I finished sewing the lace around the little bib. And now we're going to sew a super tiny button on here. And it just occurred to me that my needle may not fit through this super tiny hole. So I want to try that before. Yep, I was right. So I'm going to have to use a different needle. And those are the things you have to deal with when you're working with dolls. I tried this one. So I couldn't find a needle to fit. I think I'm going to have to go with a bigger button. Let's see if this one works. Yep. Okay. Alright. Good. Yay! And since my thread is doubled, I'm really only going to make one pass through the holes because this is not going to be a button that's used for buttoning, so it's not going to have a lot of use and shouldn't need a lot of strength to hold it to the fabric. I do want to try to get it even. If it's not, it will drive me crazy. Okay. And then we'll just tie off a knot in the back, and our little bib will be done. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to attach this to the bodice. Alright, so now that we've got that part done, what are we going to do to attach it to the bodice? So I cut out 2 pieces of the bodice, which is of course stuck together with fray check now. So what we're going to do is sew this together, the 2 right sides. One will end up being the lining and one will end up being the front. Now we want this to be in the middle because then we can sew the lining and flip it and that'll work. But before we do that, we're going to tack this down to the bodice to make sure that we have it in the right place and it doesn't get moved when we're pinning the other thing on top, because we won't really be able to see it. So I'm going to go back to single thread on this. I want to pin this down because I just don't want it to move. I could glue it down, but y'all would kill me, wouldn't you? Alright. Don't think I didn't think about that. Alright, so we're just going to go up here, starting at this top. And again, we're putting the needle back and forth through the lace part so it won't show, not through the fabric part. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and go around and tack this down, and I'll be right back. Alright, we have the bib sewed on securely. Now what we're going to do is flip this over on top of that, and we're going to sew from the bottom of the back, up the back seam, around the neckline, down the other side, and stop, and then we'll turn it. So it's probably a good idea to pin this, despite how I hate pinning things. Otherwise, being so small, it tends to kind of move around a little bit. Now, you can sew this on the machine or you can sew it by hand. It's really up to you, whichever you prefer. But I will say this. If you sew it by hand, you have to sew little tiny stitches. Otherwise, it's not going to look good when you turn it. Okay? This neck is hard to sew on the machine, so you have a couple options. Number one, just go really slow, and you're just going to have to keep lifting the presser foot up, moving this and putting it back down. You know, kind of like that. Almost every other stitch. Or, I guess, you know, you could sew just this part by hand and then sew these parts with the machine because they're straight. Probably isn't time efficient, but it is possibly a way that you could do it. Just trying to make sure I get this even. So we're going to sew it on the machine because I think it leaves a better, cleaner look to the neckline, especially this part when you turn it, since it's got that little circle circumference, that if you tried to do this by hand and you turn it, the stitches are going to show through. Now, the problem with this bodice and sewing it is that where you're sewing, the pins are going to be in the way. So like when I'm sewing here, this pin's going to be in the way. So you really have to watch that part of it. And sometimes you just sew to the pin, take it out, sew past it, you know, and take it out as you go. So we're going to go sew this, and we'll be right back. Okay, we've sewed our little, it's like a keyhole look around the neck and down. Now, this is the important part. You've got to do this very carefully, but you have to do it or this is not going to look right when you turn it. You want to cut V's. When you're talking about something like this, you cut V's out of the seam. If it was curved the other way, you would just snip it. You do this to take the bulkiness out of the seam, otherwise it's going to bunch up when you try to turn it. Now this is where it's so good to have fray check, because the fray check almost goes down to the seam. So it's going to help keep everything from unraveling or the seam from coming loose. So I'm just going to go all the way around here, cutting almost to the seam, making little V-cuts. And naturally, always cut one side not enough, so you can see what I'm doing there, cutting the V. When you get to this point, I always cut this off to the point almost, so it doesn't bulk up when you turn it. Same on this side, cut off that point. And then we're going to do some V's over here. Just be very careful not to go too far and cut the seam. Then you're screwed. You're going to have to cut out 2 more pieces and do this whole thing over again. And nobody wants to do that. Right? Yep. So I'm going to put a couple more of these in. It's a little hard to cut in this area where the bib is, so really be careful. You know, sometimes when something's hard to cut, you put a little extra pressure and then you cut and you go, oh, I cut too much. So you can always go back in and cut more, but you can't cut less. Right? That's one of the rules of the universe. Alright, now this is when I bring out my handy dandy little iron here. This is made by Dritz, the same people who do scissors. And if you're doing doll clothes, it's a must. So you turn it on, and then you can go up to 4 in the heat settings, which for cotton or wool or something like that, I think you need 4 most of the time. I even use this a lot of times on my dolls. Actually, I can show you because I have this one right here. Because I put a plug of hair in the top so that I can spread it out and cover up all the places that were sewn. But it does tend to stick up, so I'll use this to iron down that centerpiece so that it doesn't stick up. So that's another use for this. But it's great because it has this little tiny point that you can get into places. If you're trying to use a big iron on little things, you just a lot of chance that you're going to get burned. Your fingers will get burned. Alright, so now we're going to turn this. And you're just going to have to work it with your fingers. I kind of turn the front part and then I go over, put my thumb in where the point is, turn that and get that pressed out. You can kind of press it a little bit with your fingers. You will have to iron this, but now if we had not clipped, this would be all bunched up and you'd have a lot of wrinkles and it would look ugly. So that's the reason that you have to cut those little wedges. So do the same thing over here. I'm going to put a finger into that point. Now we're going to get everything lined up before we put the iron on it. It will be that you don't see the lining behind this, so you want to pull it down so you make sure that You just see the white here, not the lining coming up behind it. Okay. You're also going to make sure we get our lace flat, that your armholes line up. These are the armholes over here. I'm probably going to do just one side at a time because it's kind of hard to hold it and iron at the same time, or you tend to get burnt that way too. This lace is trying to flip over, so I'm going to pull it down. This is probably not completely hot yet, but you just want to make sure you're using the right heat setting for whatever fabric you're using, or you can melt it or make it, the iron might make a mark on it, or even burn it. That's happened to me before. Always an adventure. If you need something to poke in there, you could use the end of a paintbrush or scissors if they're not too sharp. Try to get that point turned as much as possible. Then we're going to do the same thing on this side. We're going to try to make sure that everything is lined up before we put the heat on it. But I think it's looking like it's turned out pretty well. Yep. Okay, so we've got our bodice pretty much done. The next thing we're going to do is sew the sleeves in, and after we do that, then we can sew the bodice together. But the sleeves are much easier on these small doll clothes to sew in like this. Alright, so stay tuned for the next segment. Okay, so we've finished the little bib, but I want to show you some variations because, you know, you want to buy a pattern and you just make one dress and it's kind of boring, but, you know, there's lots of things you can do with this basic dress pattern. Most having to do with the bodice, but some with the skirt. So anyway, I cut out another piece of this just to show you a couple of different ideas. So, you know, these little buttons come in all different colors, and I always, when I buy them in like a variety pack, so I always have different colors on hand. So, you know, one thing you could do is, instead of using a white bib with the red contrasting button, you could just use some white buttons. You could make a bib, sort of a mock bib out of lace. You know, put the lace kind of around, you know, sew the lace down around it like that kind of thing. You could even use different contrasting colors that go with red. So, you know, maybe blue, and then use some blue ribbon on it, or blue shoes for the doll. You know, that's a cute idea. Or this sort of orangey yellow color is kind of pretty with it too. Again, you could use some of ribbon that matches that, you know, maybe on the skirt. Things like that. More simply, you could do just a lace collar. So, something like that. You know. And you want to do this before you do sew the lining to it, just so that whatever, you know, ends you have are sewn into the neckline. You could do sort of like a mock pleated look, where you put a row of lace on one side. I'm trying to get this untangled. And then a row of lace over here, like that. And you could even put buttons in there too. You know, there's just so many things you could do with this bodice. I will say this, if you see little tiny lace anywhere, get it. Lace is hard to find these days unless you get it online, because fabric stores just don't carry very much anymore. Used to have great selections, but I had my friend Deb that sent me these older pieces. These are more like vintage lace that she gets at like a yard sale or estate sale. And she uses the bigger laces for her business where she revamps clothing. But she's kind enough to share these smaller pieces with me. I think she gave me this too. I've bought a couple of things that I've seen. But if you just see it, like if at a yard sale or something, and you like to make doll clothes, any color really, but white is always a good color. Anything small like this, pick it up. And the buttons you can find in a lot of different places. Etsy, people on Etsy have them, and I think they have them on AliExpress as well. Lots of little doll things on Ali at pretty cheap prices, as long as you can wait a month or two to get your item. All right, let's move on to the next part. Okay, now we're going to start working on the sleeves, and I made the sleeves long for a reason. But again, there are things you can do here to make it different for each dress. The first thing you could do is, just hem this, and you're going to gather it so it'll be sort of, a gathered sleeve, not really a puff sleeve, because you have to have the gathers at the bottom too. So you could do that, and you can make it shorter. You can make the doll's sleeves any length. You don't have to stick with the length that I have here. I just did that to have enough for what we're going to do, because we're going to do something a little more complicated, so I can show you. All right, so you got that. I mean, you can also, once again, you can put some lace under it so that it's coming out from behind it. You can put some lace on top of it and leave a little bit of the fabric showing, so that's another look. All different kinds of things. You could just make a casing, so a seam, and then run elastic through it, and then gather it so that it's just a basic puff sleeve. We're going to do something a little more complicated. I want to do a puff sleeve, but I want to do one that has a little bit of the fabric beneath where the elastic is. You know what I'm saying? Now, if you did this on an adult human, you would sew a seam at the bottom, a seam at the top, then get some elastic and a safety pin and run it through there, and then gather it. That's really not that easy to do on something that's small. So the technique that I've come up with is first of all, I use this tiny little type of elastic, because I don't want it to be really strong elastic in this dress. And I cut a piece that's much longer than the piece, and I'll show you why. The first thing I'll do is to run a seam about a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch, or right at 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so I'm going to do that on my sewing machine, and I'll be right back. All right, I've run my seam, and I did this in a white thread because I think it kind of looks good to contrast it with the material decoratively, but also I wanted you to be able to see it. All right, so then you're going to fold this open. We're going to put the elastic really close to the edge of the seam, and then I'm going to take needle and thread, because this is so thin that if I sewed over it with a machine, it would probably still slip out. I want to be able to attach it firmly over here, because we're going to pull it to make the gather. Okay, so I'm going to sew this down with needle and thread. All right, so I have my needle and thread, and I'm just going to hold this Now this is kind of hard to do, especially the first one, to get it through because the elastic really wants to escape. You know what I'm saying? It does not want to have that needle go through it. If you really hold it down, you can do it. I got it through the edge. We'll get it better. I mean, you can also kind of go back and forth over it to anchor it so it won't move before you try to do that. In fact, I think I'm going to do that. Put one just over it. And that kind of helps hold it down. Oh, good. I got that one in there really good. Okay. And one more through it. And then I'm going to tie this off. That's good enough. Put a couple knots in it to hold it. Whoa. Just about got a knot I didn't want. If somebody ever invents the kind of thread that doesn't knot up while you're sewing, they will make so much money. I don't know how you do that, but that's one of the banes of my existence. Always get knots in the thread and then having to regroup. Alright, so that should anchor it. Now what we're going to do is fold it over, make sure we keep it the elastic pushed up against the seam, and we're going to run another machine seam on the other side of the elastic. Okay, we've got our seam sewed in. Now, since this side is anchored, we'll be able to pull this to gather it. And then we'll anchor this side and have our puff sleeve. But I want to sew the sleeve in to the bodice before I gather it, just to make it easier to sew. Alright, so we'll come back and do that. Alright, I've finished both sleeves, and oh, I want to show you one thing. I forgot to show this because I had made these little bows up ahead of time. This would be a cute idea too. You could either do like one bow at the top, and you could also do like a row of bows. Something like that. I just had forgot to add those in my other section, but that's a cool idea also. Alright, so we've got our sleeves done. Now we're going to take the bodice and we're going to start pinning the sleeve in. And to do this, we're going to start in the middle, this way, instead of running a gathering thread through and then sewing it down, because it's so hard to sew it down with the gathering thread, bunching it up. This way you make it so that the gathers are nice and even. It's much easier to sew. It's a little bit more time consuming, but you're going to get a better outcome doing it this way. Okay, so what we're doing now is each time we're going to ease, it's called easing, we're going to divide the extra fabric side in half, the side that has more length to gather it, and then each time we do a pin, we'll do the same thing. We'll just, I push it down with my thumb right in the middle, and that creates the gathers. Now that's a lot more even, the gathers, and it's a lot easier to sew over and not make a mistake. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing to this side. We're going to pin. Not sewing yet. So we're going to pin the other side. Find the middle of this loose part. Press that down and pin that in the middle. Same thing on this section. And this section. Alright, so now we're going to sew 1/4 inch and be right back. Alright, we've finished our sewing. So we're going to pull the pins out. I'm going to leave them here because I'm going to do the other side here in a minute. And I'll just use the same pins. Alright, and then we turn it. And there's our sleeve. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish this side by gathering the elastic part up to show you how to do it. And then I'll do the other side off camera. Okay. So this is the side that I tied down, and this is the side that I left loose. So we're going to pull the loose side, and then you're going to have to think about the size of the doll's arm, how much you want to gather it, and not be too tight. The other thing you have to think about is you're going to have to get her hand through this, and this is not like, you know, Monster High dolls or the other plastic dolls where you can pop the hand off. You know, just to push the wrist part through, you have to get the hand through. So that's why the elastic is a good idea, but you also don't want to make it too tight, or you still won't be able to, or if you do, it will be a huge hassle. So I think that's about right. So I'm going to now anchor the elastic on this side using a needle and thread. And again, I'm trying to push it through the actual elastic, otherwise it won't hold. If you use 1/4 inch elastic or 1/8 inch, maybe, you could probably sew over back and forth over that with a sewing machine and anchor it. But this little rope elastic, thread elastic, or whatever you call it, it's too thin, and if the machine doesn't go through it, if it, you know, just as it's sewing, it sews over it, which it has a tendency to do because it rolls, then the elastic can just pull out, and you'll be so upset if you've sewn it and you're pulling it, and then you pull the elastic all the way through, because you have to really start over, because there's no way you can get the elastic through once you've made the casing. That would be simple and easy. Be easier to just start over. Alright, so I've got that sewed pretty well, and I'm going to just put a couple knots in there to hold it. Intentional knots, not unintentional knots. Alright, so that's our gathered sleeve. Now I can trim off these excess pieces of elastic, and I'm going to do the other side off camera, and then I'll be back and we'll be sewing the sides together. We're getting close to being finished. Yay! Alright, we've got both sleeves sewed in now. What we're going to do is put right sides together, and we're going to do the side seams. So we just fold that over like that, and then we sew from the end of the sleeve, which is a little hard to see with it gathered, but do the best you can. Over through the underarm and down the side. My pen's going to get in the way of sewing, so I'm going to try to angle it away from the seam, okay? So we're going to just run our seam through there. Alright, we've got both side seams sewn. Now there's an important step here. We need to do some cuts in this corner where we have the underarm, so that it'll turn and not bunch up. I'm just cutting almost down to the seam. And now we're ready to turn. And out pops our sleeve. Now that we're through with the bodice part, we can start working on the skirt. Alright, so we have our bodice pretty much completed. Now we're going to work on the skirt. So we have our 3 pieces of skirt material. Alright. And the first thing we're going to do is sew these side seams together. So we're going to sew that side there and this side over here, like that. Alright, here's our skirt with these sides sewn together. So you can see we're getting a wider bottom than we do have at the top. That's what we want, so it will flare out. Now, I want to show you some options here. So, lots of options. You can just turn it up and hem it. And you want to measure this against your doll's legs to see, you know, how much of a hem you want, how long you want it to be. This pattern is made long enough so that if you just want to hem it, you can. I did this doll with a shorter skirt, and I sewed the lace, this eyelet lace, underneath it, so it sort of would look like a petticoat. You could even gather that, would make it look good. You could use tulle, you know, to put under it, like a skirt or a crinoline. Alright, so that's up to you how you want to do it. You could just do this and sew lace up like that, or even right at the bottom, or 2 rows, or different kind of lace, one kind up here, a smaller kind up here, and a bigger kind down here. You could ruche a ribbon, meaning gather the ribbon in the middle so that it's ruched, that's all it is, and run the ruched ribbon across there. You could leave it plain and just put a saucy little bow on the side, on the front. So lots of options. Again, make it your own. Make it your own special dress. Okay, so the next part of this is that we want to attach the top waist to the bodice. Alright, now we're all pinned. We're going to go sew that, and I'll be right back. Alright, we've sewn our seam, and now I'm about to show you why this is called Artistic Adventures. Because that looks horrible. And I've realized a mistake I made, which is the seam for the skirts need to line up with the side seam. I wasn't thinking about that. So, because this is Artistic Adventures, I'm going to show you how to fix this. First of all, I'm going to have to rip out that seam. I hate doing that. But I have to adjust my pattern. So, this is to show you that all is not lost when you make a mistake. You just make a lemonade. So this was my original skirt pattern. This was one I made when I was thinking I was going to just gather it. So what I want to do is I'm going to end up having 2 different patterns. One for the front of the skirt, and then one for the sides. The one for the front is going to end up being wider than the ones for the back, because they'll have to be in 2 pieces. Alright, that way I'll be able to gather it enough and then have the side seams meet basically the side seams of the skirt. Okay, so let's get our ruler, and I'm going to come over here and try to get it the same width over here. Alright, so that would be the new front of the skirt. what I came up with. We're going to have one piece as the front, and that's this one, so it'll be a little bit bigger. And then we'll have two of the sides, and they're a little bit smaller. So hopefully this will work to make the side seams match up. So I'm going to go ahead and sew the side seams together for the skirt, and I'll be right back. Okay, I've finished sewing the side seams together, and here's what we have. So since I got to this point, I'm going to do something a little different than I was doing, which is I'm going to go ahead and do the hem and the trim before I attach it to the bodice, just so it'll be a little bit easier to sew. And I'm going to use my doll here as a guide, so I know what I want to do. Is basically I want to make sure I allow enough up here for the seam, and then I'm going to turn it up about, looks like that much, and then I'm going to put this lace around over that. So it looks like pretty good measurement. So let's do that. Now you could do this one of two ways. You could do it all at one time, or you could do it all in one step, but I think given that I don't want to make any mistakes, I'm going to do it in two steps. Plus, I think I'm going to gather this a little bit. I think it would look better instead of just plain lace to gather it a little bit. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do. Sew this hem on the machine all the way around. Run a gathering thread in this, and then attach it to this. Alright, so be back in just a minute. Alright, I'll show you a little trick that will help you when you're doing this gathering. I'm not going to gather this on the sewing machine. I think it's a little bit too delicate for that. Maybe could, but I want to show you this trick, so I'll do it by hand. One of the things that's an issue is a lot of times when you're doing it by hand, or even by the machine, you don't know how much to gather, like you know, other than just keep holding it up. So what you could do is take the area that you're going to apply the lace to and lay your thread that you're going to sew with along it. Then a little bit past that, because you don't want to put a mark on it where it's going to show, I'm just going to color the thread. Should have put something under that. What am I doing? Mark the thread with a marker. So when you gather to this point, you should have enough gathered lace to put on here. Okay, and just in case you've never done this, I am going to show you how to start, and then we'll take it offline because it's going to take a while and it would be pretty boring. First of all, with lace, you're going to have to make sure you attach it, because sometimes the knots will pull through since there's so many holes in lace. So I just make another loop and then tie a knot. Okay, so that'll hold it fast. Now I'm going to just run this through till I get to this dark place, which is right here. See? Yeah, right there. And just gently gather it. I don't want it to be too gathered. But a lot of times lace at the top has sort of a hole pattern specifically for this, so you can just go in and out, in and out. And after you've done it a little bit, you can pull your thread through. And then you just keep going. I'm not going in and out of every single little hole here. That would drive you crazy, but drive me crazy. Anyway, every couple, 3 holes. Just enough so that, you can get a nice gather. Alright, I'm going to finish this off camera and I'll be back shortly. Alright, I've gotten to the point where I've reached the dark place. I think you can see it right there. Alright, and you want to measure with the lace gathered, obviously, because that's the portion that you want to show. So I'm going to stretch this just a little bit. I don't want it to be too gathered looking. You know what I mean? Or it'll be too frilly. Alright, and then at the place that I'm going to end it, I'm just going to double the lace over. So there's my mark. I'm going to double over that. And then I'm going to tie a knot. And this should anchor the end so that the thread doesn't pull through. That would really make you feel bad after you spend all that time gathering it. Alright, so now we have our lace, and I can cut off this portion. Now this is, I want to show you, this is a good example of why I think it's hard to gather things and then sew it, because it curls up. So you really almost have to pin it down. It's really much harder, I think, to sew on top of the gathered material than it is to do that easing thing. So we're going to go ahead and pin this to the skirt. And I'm going to pin it so that a little bit of the fabric shows through, but not the seam that I did. So just a little bit above the seam. I think that will look a little bit better than if I sew it right at the bottom. Gives it that sort of added decorative touch. And you're just going to have to work it with your fingers to sort of smooth it out so that the gathers are even. That's the other thing about this, is you start over here and you go that way, and by the time you get there you got a whole bunch, whereas over here you didn't. So that's another thing I like about the easing process as opposed to gathered. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to continue this off camera. It's going to take me a while to get this the way I want it, so I'll be back shortly. Alright, I finished sewing on the lace. Looks pretty good, nice and even. Now we're going to try to redo this. I've taken that other one off of the bodice and we'll start over. So to do this properly, you want to match up the side seams first. And then this side seam. Here. Now we're going to start with the middle of the bodice and the middle of the skirt and bring them together. So you have an equal amount of loose material on either side, and then just start easing by going to the middle of each section, and that will make your gathers very even. I think I've used just about all the pins that I own today, which is odd for me. Really not into pinning because it just takes time and I'm impatient. But I'll tell you, everything that you do craft-wise, you really do need to try to be patient. Alright, so the side seam's probably, the side part's probably a little bit big, so I'm gonna allow a little bit more than I had planned over here. I can always cut it off later. because I wanted to have like a huge bunch of gathers right at the back and make it look odd. The way it looks best is if it's nice and even. So hopefully this time everything will work right and it will look good. Just wasn't happy with the way that other one looked. And it's been a while since I've sewn human clothes, I'll be honest with you. So I kind of forget like what the actual patterns do look like. I did so much sewing when I was younger. And then, you know, when you're young, you're like, I don't want homemade clothes. I want clothes from the store because I want to be like everybody else. So I went through that phase when I was a teenager. I got a job when I was 15 at the mall at Toys R Us. No, not Toys R Us. What was it? Something toys. Some kind of toy store in the mall. And I had a worker's permit to be able to work at 15. Oh, that pin's horrible. Which, you know, I wasn't like immature, but I wasn't the most mature about business stuff at that time. I just felt like everything was, I mean, I was serious about it. I don't know. You know, you're really still a kid at 15, I think. So, at that point, I was able to buy clothes, and there was a clothing store right beside of the toy store, which was real handy for me. All right, I'm going to go sew this. I'll be right back. Okay, we got it sewed. Let's trim our threads. We'll take the pins out. Yeah, so the toy store, that was quite an experience. But, you know, I worked for a little while there and then went off to college and got a real job. Okay, so there's our little dress. Now we've got to do some finishing work on the back, and then we'll have to put some buttons or something on it. Probably buttons. Alright, so to get it on that chunky body, we're going to have, you know, enough of an opening in the back to get it through. So we're probably only going to sew up to about maybe right here. So this much. And then we'll fold this over to finish it. So I'm going to put a seam starting from the bottom up about 1 inch. Alright, so we sewed that. And now you can take, like, open this up like this and open up that seam. Basically, either hand sew or machine sew this flap on both sides, and then you'll have your opening that looks more finished. So what I'm going to do is sew it on the machine. We got our button sewn on, and now we need to put the elastic loops that will make the closure. And to do that, I'm sure there's other ways to do it than what I do. I'm just going to show you what I do. I take 2 pieces of this, one for each button, probably a little bit longer than it needs to be. And yay, we're going to use E6000. I'm doing this because it's easier to sew them once they're kind of connected and can't escape you. So I put this kind of in the middle and make a loop about to where I think I'm going to sew it. And then I put a clip to hold it till it dries. That. So we're going to do this other one the same way. Maybe I'll put the clip there. Yeah. Alright, so we're going to let those dry for a minute, and then we're going to sew them onto the back side of this, of the bodice, so that they meet up with the button. Be back seconds from now. Okay, this one is pretty well stuck, it looks like. Good. Alright, so we can cut off some of this and cut off more later. What we want to do is position it so that it has to stretch to go around that, and that will make it secure. So you're going to put it so that about that much is showing beyond the fabric. Now, basically you want to, first of all, corral it so that it doesn't move around a lot. So I'm just going to put a loop over the top of it. Get rid of this string. I hate it when strings stick out like that. Alright, then I'm going to do it one more time, back across over here. Alright, now I want to try to go underneath and come up through the elastic. I'm doing this a little closer to the edge. So it's just not letting me do it. Oh, there it goes. Yeah. And then I'm going to try to do the same thing. Go underneath, behind the first one, and come up to the second one. No really right or wrong way to do this. Just sew it down and make sure you get it fastened and that you go through the elastic a couple of times so we can knot it off. And then what I'm going to do is sew the other one on off camera just to save some time, and then we can try it on our doll. Hopefully everything will work perfectly. I'm sure there's lots of other things you could do. You know, you can decorate these things however you want. And that's the nice thing about, you know, having a basic pattern, is you can change it up if you'd like. Alright, we're going to trim that thread off and then trim the rest of this elastic off so that it looks like that. And now I will be back in a second. Alright, I got my loops sewed on, the buttons are on, the dress is done. And here's the dress on the doll it was intended for. I think it turned out so cute and looks great on her. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. It was very long and detailed, but I wanted to do it just to show you every single little aspect. And we did that. And now we're going to be working on her wig next, and then she will be complete. She looks like she has her wig on, but she maybe does, she maybe doesn't. So please subscribe. I don't want you to miss a thing.